The heavy gates of the prison opened with a metallic sound that made everyone in the yard turn their heads. A new prisoner had arrived. He looked different from the others. His steps were calm, his face unreadable, and his eyes carried a kind of silence that made people uneasy. He wasn't tall or muscular, but there was something about him, something that made you want to look twice. He walked in holding a small bag, nothing more. The guards led him toward his cell block, and as he passed, whispers began to rise. In a place where everyone wanted to know who you were and what you'd done, being quiet only made you stand out more. The man didn't talk to anyone. He didn't look scared, and he didn't look proud either. It was as if he was simply waiting for time to pass. The first day, he stayed by himself. During lunch, he sat alone at the end of a long table, slowly eating the food no one else touched. The others watched him closely. In prison, every new face was a test. If you looked weak, someone would make you prove yourself. If you looked too confident, someone would try to break that confidence. The man didn't fit either box. He was just calm. That calmness made some people uncomfortable. By evening, the stories had already begun. Some said he was a businessman who'd made one wrong decision. Others said he used to work for someone powerful. No one knew the truth, but the mystery around him made people talk even more. In the next cell over, a man named Rico was the one everyone listened to. He had been inside for years and liked being in control. Nothing in that block happened without his say. When he saw the new guy sitting quietly, not trying to greet or show respect, he took it as an insult. Rico didn't like being ignored. The next morning, when the new prisoner walked into the yard, Rico and his group were already waiting. "Hey, new guy," one of them shouted. "You think you're too good to talk to people?" The man stopped but didn't reply. He just looked at them for a second, then walked to the side where the weights were. Rico smirked. "Oh, he's one of those," he said to his friends. "Let's see how long that attitude lasts." Throughout the day, small things started happening. Someone took the new man's spot at the table during lunch. Someone else accidentally spilled water near his bed. Each time he simply moved aside, cleaned it up, and stayed silent. The quietness made the others restless. They wanted a reaction, but they never got one. By the third day, Rico decided to test him directly. He approached the man in the yard, holding a half smile that wasn't friendly at all. "You don't talk much, do you?" he said. The man shook his head slightly. "Not unless there's something to say." The calm reply caught Rico off guard. "You got jokes now?" he said, stepping closer. "You think this is your place to act smart?" The man looked him in the eye. His voice was still calm when he said, "I'm not here to act. I'm just here to finish my time." Then he turned away and sat down on the bench again. For a moment, Rico didn't know what to say. Nobody ever turned their back on him like that. He felt a mix of anger and confusion. One of his friends muttered, "Man, you gonna let him walk off like that?" Rico clenched his jaw but said nothing. Not yet. Over the next few days, he watched the new man closely. The guy had a routine. Woke up early, exercised quietly in his cell, ate alone, and never joined in with the loud talks or jokes. He helped one of the older prisoners carry his tray when he dropped it, but he never asked for thanks. He kept his head down, but not in fear. It was strange, almost like he had lived through things much worse than prison. Even the guards noticed. One afternoon, a young officer whispered to another, "That new guy, he doesn't act like most people here." The older guard nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "he's different. Best to leave him be." But Rico didn't leave him be. He couldn't. The calm man's presence made him feel challenged, even though nothing had been said. In a place where control meant survival, that silence felt like a threat. One night in the dining hall, Rico decided to push harder. As the new man passed by, Rico stuck his foot out, tripping him. The tray fell, food scattered on the floor, and the room went quiet. Everyone waited for what would happen next. The man stood up, brushed off his shirt, and looked around the room, not in anger, but as if he was trying to decide whether it was worth responding. Then he bent down, picked up the tray, and said softly, "You should be careful next time. Someone might get hurt." Rico laughed loudly. "You threatening me now?" The man met his eyes again. "No," he said, "I'm warning you." That small moment changed everything. People in the room felt it. There was something about the way he said it. Not loud, not scared, just sure. Rico tried to laugh it off, but a flicker of doubt showed in his face. After that night, everyone started watching the two of them more closely. The prison yard was filled with whispers again. Some said the new guy had been in the army. Others said he'd been part of something secret. A few even claimed he had been locked up before, somewhere far tougher. Whatever the truth was, the man never confirmed or denied anything. A week passed. Rico still wanted to prove himself, but the feeling in the air had changed. When the man walked by, even the loudest inmates stayed quiet. Not out of fear, but out of something else, respect, maybe curiosity. Still, Rico couldn't let it go. One afternoon, while everyone was out for exercise, he cornered the man near the wall. "You think you're better than us, huh?" he said. The man shook his head. "No, I just think fighting won't fix anything." Rico stepped closer. "You talk like a teacher or something. You know where you are, right?" "This isn't a classroom." The man didn't move. "I know where I am, but that doesn't mean I have to act like I belong here." Something about that line hit Rico harder than he expected. He didn't swing, though his hands were clenched. He looked at the man for a long moment, then turned and walked away. His friends followed, confused. That evening, as lights went out, a few prisoners whispered quietly in their bunks. "He didn't even fight back," one said. Rico backed down. Another replied, "Yeah, but did you see his eyes? I don't think that man's scared of anyone." Days turned into weeks. The calm man became part of the rhythm of the prison, though no one really knew him. Some of the younger inmates started asking him questions: how to stay out of trouble, how to focus. He gave short, simple answers, but they seemed to mean something. He didn't preach, just listened. Rico, from a distance, kept watching. The respect he had tried to take by force was now being given freely to someone who didn't even ask for it. It ate at him, but it also made him think. One afternoon, the man sat in the yard reading an old, worn-out book. Rico walked past and stopped. "You really don't care what people think of you, do you?" he asked. The man looked up briefly. "What people think doesn't change who I am." Rico stood there silently for a few seconds before nodding slightly and walking off. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was something different. A small shift. As the sun went down that evening, the yard fell quiet except for the sound of the wind. The man sat alone again, eyes on the horizon beyond the high walls. He wasn't smiling, but there was a strange calm on his face, the kind that comes from someone who has seen chaos before and learned not to fear it. Inside, the other inmates went to their cells, still talking in low voices about the new guy who never fought back. Some thought he was crazy, some thought he was brave. But deep down, everyone felt the same thing. They had all challenged someone they didn't really understand. And though no one could say why, they all knew one truth already. This quiet man was not the kind of person you wanted as an enemy. He wasn't loud, he wasn't angry, but something in him was unshakable. It was only the beginning. But the prison was already changing quietly, one calm moment at a time. The next few days after that quiet warning were filled with tension that everyone could feel. The yard, usually loud with voices and laughter, now had long stretches of silence whenever the new man walked through. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone was waiting for something to happen. Rico tried to act normal, cracking jokes and keeping his usual swagger, but deep down he knew his pride had been bruised. He had ruled this place for a long time. Nobody ever looked him in the eye the way that man did. No one had ever spoken to him with such calm confidence, like a teacher correcting a student. It made him angry, but more than that, it made him curious. Who was this guy really? On the third morning, Rico sat with his usual group at breakfast. The room buzzed with low voices. Someone said, "Man, that new guy's got you thinking. You gonna let him just walk around like that?" Rico didn't answer. He stirred his coffee slowly, his jaw tight. "Don't worry," he finally said. "I'll handle it my way." The others nodded, though they weren't sure what that meant. Rico's way usually meant trouble. Later that day, during yard time, Rico decided to end the guessing. He called out to the man across the yard. Everyone turned to look. "Hey, quiet guy," he shouted. "You think you can just come here and act like you're better than the rest of us? Let's see what you're made of." The man stopped his walk and looked toward him. For a few seconds, he said nothing. The other inmates started to gather around, forming a loose circle. Even the guards standing by the fence didn't move in right away. They'd seen this kind of thing before. Usually it was over quickly. The man finally spoke, his tone still even. "You really don't want to do this." The words were soft, but they carried through the yard. The inmates began to whisper to one another. Rico laughed loudly, trying to shake off the strange chill that came with those words. "Oh, I want to," he said. "Tonight after lights out? Laundry area. Let's see if you can back up that calm face." The man didn't reply. He just turned and walked away. That was all it took for the yard to explode with talk. By lunchtime, everyone knew what was going to happen. Rico had challenged him. It was like an unspoken event. Everyone wanted to see it, but no one dared talk too loud about it near the guards. That evening, the air in the cell block felt heavy. Even those not involved were restless. People whispered behind doors, glancing at the new man's cell. He sat quietly on his bunk, reading an old book as if nothing was about to happen. One of the older inmates, a man who had seen dozens of fights over the years, walked up to his bars and said softly, "You don't have to go, you know. Rico's just trying to prove something." The man looked up from his book and gave a small nod. Sometimes letting someone think they're right is easier. But sometimes if they won't listen, you have to let them learn. The old man frowned. "You sound like someone who's done this before." The man closed his book and said quietly, "Let's just say I've met people like Rico before. They don't scare me." When lights went out, the cell block fell silent except for the distant sound of guards walking and the faint hum of machines. Then, as the minutes passed, quiet footsteps began moving through the shadows. Rico and his group slipped out, making their way to the laundry area. The new man was already there, standing near the back wall, hands in his pockets, waiting. He didn't look nervous. He didn't even look angry. Rico stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "So this is it," he said. "You've been walking around like you own the place. Time to show who's really in charge." The man didn't answer. He simply looked at him with those same calm eyes. The silence stretched long enough for Rico to feel uneasy. He didn't understand why this guy wasn't reacting. So he moved first. He swung a wide, fast punch that would have sent most men down, but it never landed. The man stepped aside so smoothly that it almost looked like a dance. Rico stumbled, surprised, then tried again. Another swing. Another miss. Before he could react, the man's hand moved, not hard, not fast, just firm, and Rico found himself on the ground staring up. Breathless but unhurt. The whole thing lasted less than 10 seconds. The others froze. No one said a word. The man didn't even look angry. He knelt slightly, looked down at Rico and said, "Now do you understand why I told you not to do this?" There was no threat in his voice, only disappointment, like a teacher talking to a student who hadn't listened. Rico looked away, face red with shame. Then the man stood and walked past the others without another word. He didn't boast, didn't look back. Just walked out, leaving the stunned group in silence. That night, the story spread faster than anything else ever had. Every corner of the prison buzzed with it. The new guy had faced Rico and ended it in seconds. No blood, no shouting, no chaos. Just calm precision. Some inmates said he was ex-military. Others said he used to train fighters. A few even claimed he had worked for special forces. Nobody really knew. But the one thing everyone agreed on was that Rico had picked the wrong man. The next morning, when the guards opened the cells, the atmosphere was different. People looked at the quiet man with a strange mix of fear and respect. He didn't seem proud or smug. He went about his day as if nothing had happened. Rico, on the other hand, kept to himself. His friends didn't tease him, they didn't dare. There was something in his eyes now, something heavy. For years, he'd been the one people respected out of fear. Now, he had met someone who didn't need fear to be respected. During lunch, the quiet man sat alone as usual. But this time, one of the younger inmates walked over and sat across from him. "Hey," he said softly, "that thing last night. You could have really hurt him. Why didn't you?" The man looked up, his expression calm. "Hurting people isn't strength. Controlling yourself is." The younger inmate thought about that for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Guess that's why everyone's talking about you." The man didn't answer. He went back to eating quietly. Later that day, the head guard, a man who had been working there for over 15 years, called him aside. "You've been here just a few weeks, and already the whole place is talking," the guard said. "That's not easy to do," the man shrugged. "I didn't want trouble. But sometimes trouble doesn't listen." The guard looked at him carefully. "You remind me of someone I knew years ago," he said. "Someone who used to teach self-defense. He always said the same thing, that control is more dangerous than anger." The man smiled slightly. "Sounds like a wise person." The guard studied him for another second before nodding. "Just keep your head down. We don't need more stories flying around." The man nodded and went back to his cell. But it was too late. The story was already bigger than him. By nightfall, the whispers had turned into quiet respect. Even those who didn't like him couldn't help but acknowledge what they had seen or heard. Rico avoided him for days after that. He didn't speak to anyone about what happened, but his attitude changed. He didn't pick fights. He didn't bark orders. Sometimes he would sit in the corner of the yard, watching the quiet man from a distance, as if trying to understand him. The others noticed that too. For the first time in a long while, there was peace in the yard. People weren't shouting as much. Fewer fights broke out. It was like the entire block had taken a deep breath and decided to calm down. Nobody said it, but everyone knew the reason why. The quiet man never tried to lead anyone, but his presence alone changed things. People started to follow his example, eating quietly, helping the older prisoners, keeping arguments small. It wasn't out of fear. It was because they saw what real strength looked like. One evening, as the sun set behind the tall walls, Rico finally walked over to him again. The man was sitting on the bench staring at the sky. Rico stood there for a few seconds, unsure of what to say. Finally, he muttered, "You could have embarrassed me worse that night." "You didn't, why?" The man looked up, his voice calm as always. "Because making someone fall isn't hard. Helping them stand up again is." Rico said nothing. He just nodded slightly and walked away, his mind heavy with thoughts he didn't have words for. From that day on, the quiet man wasn't just another inmate. He had become something else, a reminder that power didn't always need noise. And though the story of that night would keep spreading, the truth behind it was simple. Sometimes, the strongest person in the room is the one who doesn't want to fight at all. After the night of the fight, the prison didn't feel the same. There was a quietness in the air. Not the kind that came from fear, but the kind that comes when people finally start thinking. The story of what happened spread to every corner of the place. Some said it was a fluke. Others said the quiet man was someone who had been trained for things much worse than prison life. Nobody really knew who he was, but everyone knew one thing. Rico had learned his lesson, and nobody else was planning to test the new man again. In the days that followed, the man kept his same routine. He still woke up early, did his push-ups in silence, read from that same old book, and kept to himself. He didn't act proud, didn't show off, and didn't talk about what happened. If someone mentioned it, he would simply shake his head and say, "It's over." But for the others, it wasn't over. The mystery around him only grew stronger. One afternoon in the yard, a group of prisoners sat in the corner talking quietly. "You think he was in the army?" one asked. "Maybe special forces," another whispered. "No way, he moves too calm for that." "Maybe he was a cop," a third said. The guessing went on, but nobody dared to ask him directly. The guards, too, had noticed. During lunch, one of them leaned toward the senior officer and said, "You know that new guy? The one who shut down Rico? I've seen people like him before." The older officer raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? Where?" The younger one shrugged. "Back when I worked in security training. The way he moves, that's not something you learn in the street." The senior officer didn't reply. He just looked toward the quiet man and nodded slightly like he already knew. Later that evening, the quiet man was helping clean the hallway with a few other inmates. One of them, a tall guy with a nervous voice, said, "You know, Rico used to run this place. Nobody ever stood up to him like that." The man smiled faintly. "I didn't stand up to him. I just stopped him from making a mistake." The tall guy looked confused. "You could have really hurt him, though." "You didn't even hit him." The man looked down at the mop in his hand and said softly, "Hurting people is easy. Stopping yourself takes more strength." The tall guy nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand it, but the words stuck with him. Days passed and something began to shift. The prison yard, once filled with loud arguments and fights, became quieter. The smaller disputes that used to end in violence started ending in conversation. People began to copy the man's calmness without even realizing it. Even the guards seemed to notice the difference in mood, but not everyone liked it. Some of the rougher inmates from another block saw the change as weakness. They didn't like how things were calming down. One of them, a man named Troy, started talking big. "That quiet guy? He's nothing special. Rico went easy on him. Maybe it's time someone else put him in his place." The rumor reached Rico quickly. He didn't like Troy, and he didn't want anyone else getting involved. So, one afternoon in the yard, Rico walked straight up to Troy and said quietly, Don't go near him. Troy laughed. What, you scared of him now? Rico didn't laugh back. You don't get it. He's not scared of us. He's not like the rest of us. Leave him alone, Troy shrugged. Sounds like fear to me. Rico shook his head slowly. No, it's respect. And you'd be smart to learn the difference. Still, Troy didn't listen. That night, he waited until most of the inmates were back in their cells. He slipped out during cleaning duty, pretending he was supposed to be there. When he reached the laundry area, he saw the quiet man folding his clothes. Troy smirked. So you're the famous calm guy everyone's talking about. The man didn't look up. If you're looking for a story, I don't have one. Troy stepped closer. People say you beat Rico without even trying. That true? The man sighed. Nobody won that night. We just stopped before something got worse. Troy tilted his head. Sounds like something a scared man would say. The man finally looked up. His eyes were steady, unreadable. I've been scared before. Just not of you. Troy took a step forward, trying to intimidate him, but before he could even reach out, one of the guards walked in. Laundry's closed. Back to your cells, he barked. Troy grinned but backed off. As he walked away, he muttered, This isn't over. The next morning, Rico found Troy at breakfast. You really want to end up like me? Rico asked. Troy frowned. You're still breathing. Doesn't look that bad. Rico leaned closer. You don't understand. He could have ended me that night if he wanted. He didn't. You think that makes him weak? It doesn't. It means he's dangerous in a way you can't see. Troy rolled his eyes, but somewhere deep inside, the warning stayed with him. Meanwhile, the quiet man kept to his pattern. He started helping the older inmates who struggled with reading or writing. In the evenings, he'd sit at one of the small tables, helping them sound out words from old newspapers. The guards allowed it because it kept people busy and calm. For the first time in years, some of the prisoners started talking about plans for when they got out. Jobs, family, anything that gave them hope. One afternoon, while he was helping an older man write a letter to his daughter, the senior officer from before approached the table. You've done more to calm this place in 2 weeks than we have in years, the officer said quietly. The man looked up with a small smile. People just need to be reminded that they can be better. The officer nodded. You were military, weren't you? The man's smile faded. Something like that, he said. Then he looked back at the letter and continued writing, ending the conversation. That night, the officer told another guard, I checked his file. It's clean. But there's a section that's blacked out, classified. I think I know why he's different. The other guard frowned. Then why's he in here? The officer sighed. Maybe sometimes the system doesn't care who you were. It just cares about what you did. The mystery deepened even more after that. Back in the yard, Troy finally decided to push again. He waited until the quiet man was alone near the fence. Hey, he said, you gonna keep hiding behind your words or are you gonna prove yourself? The man didn't move. I have nothing to prove. Troy grinned and threw a punch. It never connected. The man stepped aside and caught his arm gently, almost softly, turning it just enough for Troy to lose balance and stumble forward. The man held him steady instead of letting him fall. See, he said calmly. You're stronger when you're balanced. Troy blinked, confused. You teaching me a lesson? The man smiled faintly. I'm trying to. Then he let go and walked away. No one said a word after that. Even Troy didn't. The yard stayed quiet for a long time. That evening, Rico went to the quiet man's cell. He leaned against the bars and said, You really could run this place if you wanted. The man looked up from his book. I don't want to run it. I just want people to stop fighting long enough to think. Rico chuckled softly. You're something else, man. I used to think strength was about fear. Now I'm not so sure. The man nodded. Fear can control people, but it doesn't change them. Respect does. Rico stood there a moment thinking, then said, You changed this place, you know that? The man smiled slightly. I didn't change anything. People just started seeing they could be more than what this place made them. By now, even the guards noticed that fights had dropped. Reports came in cleaner. People followed rules without being forced. The warden even mentioned it during a meeting. Whatever's happening in Block C, keep it going. The quiet man didn't take credit. Every night he still read in silence, still helped others, still carried himself the same way. But everyone knew it was him. One night when the lights went out, Rico lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. For years, he had lived by strength and pride, thinking those were the only things that mattered inside those walls. Now he realized something else. Sometimes it took a calm man, not a loud one, to show what true power looked like. Across the hall, the quiet man sat on his bunk, thinking too. He didn't regret stopping Rico that night, but he also didn't feel proud of it. To him, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about making sure no one else had to keep fighting just to survive another day. As he lay back and closed his eyes, a faint smile crossed his face. He could feel the difference in the air. Less anger, fewer shouts, more peace. He didn't know how long it would last, but for now, it was enough. The next morning, the sun shone through the narrow windows, casting light across the gray walls. For the first time in a long time, the prison felt alive in a good way. People greeted each other, helped each other. Even Rico nodded at a guard as he walked by. The quiet man stood near the fence, breathing in the cool morning air. He didn't say a word, but deep down he knew the truth. Change had begun, and all it took was one person refusing to fight back. The tension inside the prison grew heavier with every passing day. The story of how the newcomers had underestimated the quiet man named Daniel had spread through every block. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a warning. Yet, some people always thought they could be the exception. Some believed that Daniel had just been lucky, or that he had help from someone. And when men like that convince themselves they're smarter or stronger than others, trouble is never far away. The days in prison often felt endless. The loud clang of cell doors, the sound of guards shouting orders, the smell of disinfectant mixed with old concrete. Everything reminded Daniel that this was a world where respect had to be earned and guarded carefully. He didn't try to act tough. He simply moved quietly, did his job, and stayed away from drama. But in prison, peace doesn't last forever. One afternoon, Daniel was sitting in the library, a place most people ignored. He liked it there. It was quiet, and the guards rarely bothered checking on it. He was reading a book about human behavior when he heard footsteps behind him. He looked up and saw 3 men standing there. They weren't from his block, but their reputation had traveled far. The one in front, a tall man with sharp eyes, smiled in a way that didn't reach his face. "You're Daniel, right?" he asked. Daniel closed the book gently. "Yeah," he replied calmly. The man nodded. "Heard you think you run this place." Daniel almost smiled. "I don't run anything. I just mind my business," but the tall man leaned closer. "That's funny because I've got people saying otherwise. They say you made a fool out of Rix and his crew. That true?" Daniel didn't answer. He could tell this wasn't a friendly chat. The man's friends shifted behind him, their eyes scanning the room like wolves circling prey. Daniel stood up slowly, his calm presence somehow making the other 2 hesitate. "If you came here for a story," Daniel said quietly, "you're wasting your time." The tall man's grin faded. "Nah," he said. "I came here to remind everyone that nobody's untouchable." Daniel didn't move, didn't speak. He just looked at the man straight in the eyes. Something about that quiet confidence unsettled him. After a few tense seconds, the man scoffed and walked away, pretending he wasn't bothered. But deep down, Daniel knew it wasn't over. In prison, a man who feels embarrassed will always look for revenge. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He had been through enough in life to know what was coming. He wasn't afraid, not exactly, but he hated the thought of more unnecessary conflict. He remembered the advice his old mentor once gave him before he got locked up. In a place where everyone wants power, the one who stays calm has the real control. 2 days later, trouble came. During mealtime, as Daniel was walking with his tray, one of the same men from the library suddenly bumped into him hard. The tray fell, spilling food all over the floor. The room went quiet. Daniel didn't react. He bent down, picked up the tray, and started walking away. But the tall man couldn't stand being ignored. He shouted, "Hey, you two scared to say something?" Daniel turned slowly, looked at him, and said in a steady voice, "If you're looking for a fight, make sure you can finish it." The tension exploded in seconds. The tall man lunged at Daniel, but Daniel moved fast, sidestepping and using the man's momentum against him. It wasn't flashy, and it was controlled, precise. The fight didn't last long. Before the guards even reached them, Daniel had already pinned the man to the ground. He didn't punch him. He didn't humiliate him. He just whispered, "I told you to walk away." When the guards broke it up, they took both men to isolation for a few days. Daniel didn't argue. He just accepted it. In the silence of his small cell, he found himself thinking about how strange life had become, how people were so desperate for control that they'd destroy themselves trying to prove they had it. He thought about how he once used to be like that too, but not anymore. He had learned that real strength didn't need to shout. When Daniel was released back into general population, something unexpected happened. Instead of being seen as a threat, people started to respect him more deeply. Even the guards treated him differently. They could see he wasn't just another inmate trying to act tough. He carried himself like someone who had already faced worse battles outside these walls. One guard, an older man who had been working there for years, stopped Daniel one morning. "You know," he said, "I've seen men come and go here. Most of them talk big but break easy. You're different," Daniel just shrugged. "Maybe I just learned my lessons the hard way." The guard smiled. "Maybe, but don't lose that calm. It's rare in here." Days passed and peace returned for a while. Daniel went back to reading, exercising, and helping out in the prison workshop. But something inside him had changed. He started noticing how lost most of the men around him were, how they acted tough not because they were strong but because they were scared. Scared of being weak, scared of being forgotten. And for the first time, Daniel began thinking about life after prison. He wanted something better, not just for himself but maybe for others too. He started volunteering to help new inmates adjust. At first, the guards laughed at the idea, but when they saw how Daniel could calm down even the most aggressive men, they let him continue. He became someone people could talk to, a quiet counselor in a place where no one trusted anyone. Word spread beyond his block, and soon even men from other areas came to him for advice. He never acted like a hero, never gave long speeches. He just listened, and sometimes that was enough. But peace has a way of being tested. One night, a rumor started that Daniel was secretly working with the guards. It wasn't true, but in prison, truth doesn't matter as much as what people believe. The rumor spread fast. Some of the men who once respected him started keeping their distance. A few even gave him cold looks during meals. Daniel could feel the change in the air, that same heavy silence before another storm. He knew he couldn't ignore it forever. So one evening in the yard, he decided to face it directly. He walked up to the man who had started the rumor, a young inmate trying to build his reputation. The crowd watched quietly. Daniel looked him in the eyes and said, "You think I'm with the guards?" The young man smirked. "That's what I heard." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then you heard wrong. But if you want to find out the truth, I won't stop you." The young man tried to act bold, but something about Daniel's calm presence made him hesitate. He didn't know whether to fight or back down. In the end, he just muttered, "We'll see," and walked away. The crowd dispersed and Daniel stood alone, knowing the situation wasn't over but feeling oddly at peace. That night, Daniel wrote something in his notebook. It was a line that came from somewhere deep inside him. "Sometimes you don't win by fighting. Sometimes you win by standing still and letting others see who you really are." He didn't know it then, but those words would later change more lives than he could imagine. For now, he was just a man trying to survive another day behind bars. Yet the way he carried himself, calm, steady, unshaken, was already turning him into something more. He had become the one person in that prison everyone underestimated until it was too late. And even those who still hated him couldn't deny one thing. Daniel wasn't just surviving prison. He was quietly mastering it. Months passed, and Daniel's presence inside the prison had become something of a quiet legend. The men who once saw him as a threat now treated him like a guide. Even the guards noticed that the prison had grown calmer since Daniel started talking to the new inmates. He never gave orders, never claimed authority, but somehow people listened to him. His silence carried more weight than most men shouting, but peace inside prison never lasts forever. There's always someone who wants to prove they're tougher, smarter, or more feared, and one day that someone arrived in the form of a new transfer, a man named Colt. He was tall, rough-looking, and carried an energy that made even the guards cautious. The first day he walked into the yard, the air changed. The other prisoners watched him closely. He didn't speak much, but his eyes were sharp and restless, scanning everything and everyone. Colt had been moved from another prison after too many fights and too many broken rules. Rumor had it that he liked to test the strongest man wherever he went, so it didn't take long before he started asking about Daniel. "Heard there's a man here who thinks he's the boss," Colt said one day, smirking as he looked around. "Where's he hiding?" When word reached Daniel, he didn't react. He had faced this kind of thing before. He knew that in a place like this, reputation was both protection and danger. Too much respect could turn into jealousy. Too much calm could look like weakness. But Daniel had learned long ago not to feed into anyone's ego. Still, he couldn't ignore it if it threatened the fragile peace that had finally settled in. That evening, Daniel sat in the workshop, fixing a broken chair. A shadow fell across the table, and when he looked up, Colt was standing there, arms crossed and that same smirk on his face. "So, you're the one everyone talks about," Colt said. "You don't look like much." Daniel put down the hammer. "I'm just trying to finish my time quietly," he said. Colt leaned closer. "Yeah, that's not what I heard. They say you run things here. You got everyone scared," Daniel sighed softly. "If that's what they say, they're wrong. Fear doesn't last here. Respect does," Colt chuckled. "Sounds like you think you're some kind of wise man." Daniel met his eyes calmly. "No, just someone who's tired of wasting energy on things that don't matter." The tension between them was thick. Some prisoners nearby had stopped working, pretending not to watch but clearly listening. Colt tilted his head, studying Daniel for a moment, then said, "We'll see how long that calm of yours lasts." He walked away, but Daniel knew this wasn't the end. Trouble had arrived again, and this time it felt different. Colt wasn't just another loudmouth looking for fame. He was dangerous, not because of his strength, but because he enjoyed chaos. And men like that didn't stop until they got what they wanted. The next few days were uneasy. Colt started testing boundaries, taking other men's food, pushing people around, breaking small rules just to show he could. The guards wrote him up, but it didn't change anything. He was looking for something bigger, and Daniel could feel that target slowly turning toward him. One afternoon in the yard, Colt finally made his move. He walked straight up to Daniel while everyone watched. "You like playing the good guy," he said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "You think you're better than the rest of us?" Daniel looked at him quietly. "No," he replied. "I just don't see the point of fighting people who already have nothing left to lose." Colt laughed harshly. "That's the problem with you quiet types. You think words can save you." Before Daniel could reply, Colt shoved him hard in the chest. The crowd gasped. For a second, Daniel didn't move. Then he slowly took a step back, not out of fear, but to stay balanced. He looked at Colt and said calmly, "You can do this if you want, but it won't prove anything." Colt's expression darkened. "It'll prove I'm not afraid of anyone." The tension broke like glass. Colt swung first, fast and hard. But Daniel didn't fight back immediately. He dodged, blocking just enough to protect himself. He didn't want to fight. But when Colt came again, swinging wildly, Daniel had no choice. He moved quickly, his movements sharp but controlled. Within moments, Colt was on the ground, breathing hard, furious and embarrassed. Daniel didn't hit him again. He just stepped back, breathing steadily. "It's over," he said quietly. The guards rushed in and separated them, yelling orders, but everyone in that yard saw what had really happened. Daniel hadn't fought to win, he'd fought to stop it. And that difference was what made people respect him even more. After that day, something shifted inside the prison. Even Colt, bruised and angry, kept his distance. The respect Daniel carried was no longer built on fear or rumors. It was built on something deeper: quiet strength, patience, and the courage to stay calm when everyone else lost control. Weeks later, Daniel was called to the warden's office. The guards didn't tell him why. As he sat across from the warden, he noticed a file on the desk with his name on it. The warden looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You've been here a while now," he said. "And I've been hearing good things. From guards, from inmates, even from the chaplain." Daniel stayed quiet, unsure where this was going. The warden leaned back. "We've seen men come in here and leave worse. But you've managed to do something rare. You've made this place calmer. You helped people who no one else could reach." Daniel looked down. "I just didn't want to waste my time here doing nothing." The warden smiled faintly. "Well, maybe it's time we put that to better use. There's a rehabilitation program starting soon. I think you'd be a good fit, not as a participant, but as a mentor." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. He felt something shift inside him. something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He nodded slowly. If it helps even one person, I'll do it. From that day on, Daniel's role inside the prison changed completely. He started leading small sessions for new inmates, teaching them not how to be strong but how to be calm, how to think before reacting, how to find purpose even in a place like this. He didn't use fancy words or act like a teacher. He spoke simply from experience, and that's what made people listen. Months passed. The fights became fewer. The noise inside the cell block softened. Even the guards started noticing the change. Daniel had become something more than just another prisoner. He had become a quiet force of peace. One evening, after finishing a session, Daniel sat by his window, watching the sun set behind the tall walls. The sky was streaked with orange and gold, and for the first time in years, he felt something close to freedom. He knew he was still behind bars, but his mind wasn't trapped anymore. He thought about how it all began, the challenges, the fights, the endless tests. He had been the man no one expected to survive, the man others challenged to prove themselves. But now, looking back, Daniel realized that every challenge had taught him something. Every test had stripped away his anger and replaced it with understanding. One night, a guard came to his cell and handed him a letter. It was from one of the men who had been transferred months earlier, someone Daniel had once helped. The letter was short but powerful. It said, I'm out now. I got a job staying clean. You told me to stand still long enough to see who I really am. You were right. Thank you. Daniel sat there for a long time, reading the letter again and again. A small smile formed on his face. Maybe that was what all of this had been for. Not revenge, not survival, but transformation. A few months later, Daniel was granted early release for good behavior. When the day came, the entire block went quiet as he walked toward the gates. Some men nodded respectfully. Others simply watched in silence. The guard shook his hand, something they rarely did. As the heavy gates opened and Daniel stepped into the sunlight, he took a deep breath. The air outside felt different, freer, cleaner, alive. He didn't know what awaited him beyond those walls, but he knew one thing for sure. He was not the same man who had walked in. He turned once to look back at the towering walls that had once trapped him. They no longer felt like a curse. They were a reminder of the lessons learned, the strength found, and the peace earned. As he walked down the road, the world stretched open before him. For the first time in years, Daniel smiled, not because he was free from prison, but because he was finally free from the person he used to be. And in the hearts of those still inside, his story lived on, the story of the man everyone once challenged but no one could ever truly break.